Imagine being a young royal woman in ancient Egypt. You are taken to Thebes. Your name is placed inside a royal cartouche. By the way, if you ever hear the word cartouche, it's simply the oval-shaped frame that surrounds a royal name in Egyptian hieroglyphs. Think of it as a special name tag that tells you, this name belongs to a king or queen. Okay, again. Imagine being a young royal woman in ancient Egypt, right? You receive estates, servants, officials, musicians, and enormous wealth. You perform rituals before one of Egypt's greatest gods. And from that moment on, your official title becomes God's Wife of Amun. But did she really marry a god? Was there a wedding? Was she treated like Amun's human bride? And how did a religious title eventually turn some women into the most powerful figures in southern Egypt? To understand that, we first need to meet Amun. Who was Amun? Amun was one of the most important gods in Egyptian history. His name is generally connected with the idea of the Hidden One. He was strongly associated with Thebes, the city around modern Luxor. But Amun did not begin as the uncontested supreme god of Egypt. His national importance grew when Theban rulers became increasingly powerful and eventually reunified Egypt. During the New Kingdom, especially from the 18th dynasty onward, Amun became one of the central gods of the Egyptian state. He was frequently joined with the sun god Ra as Amun-Ra. This did not mean that Amun and Ra disappeared as separate gods. Egyptian theology allowed divine identities to combine while retaining their individual forms. As Amun-Ra, he could be praised as a creator, a solar deity, and king of the gods. His main temple complex at Karnak became one of the largest and wealthiest religious institutions in Egypt. Kings gave it land, livestock, workshops, precious metals, captives, and income from military campaigns. So serving Amun was never merely a private religious matter. It could place someone at the center of wealth, kingship, and political authority. What did God's Wife of Amun mean? The Egyptian title is conventionally translated as God's Wife of Amun, but we should immediately remove one misleading image. This was not an ordinary marriage between a woman and an invisible husband. We have no surviving description of a wedding in which a woman exchanged vows or rings with Amun. The title identified a woman who held a special ritual relationship with the god and participated in his temple cult. The office had a long history, and its meaning changed over time. It existed before the New Kingdom, but it became particularly prominent among royal women at the beginning of the 18th dynasty. At that stage, it was closely tied to queenship, royal legitimacy, and the cult of Amun. Later, especially during the Third Intermediate and late periods, it developed into something even larger, a powerful religious institution centered in Thebes, with its own wealth, estates, administrators, and political influence. The title made sense inside Egyptian temple theology. A temple was not simply a public hall where people gathered for sermons. It was the earthly residence of a god. The divine statue inside its sanctuary was treated as a living sacred presence. Priests opened the shrine, purified and dressed the image, presented food and incense, and performed the prescribed words and gestures. Within this sacred household, gods could have divine families and female partners. The god's wife occupied a human ritual position connected with Amun's divine world. Who could hold the office? This was not an office open to any woman who simply wished to enter the temple. Its holders were usually members of the royal family or women directly selected within the ruling political order. In the early New Kingdom, queens and royal daughters often held the title. In later periods, kings placed their own daughters in the office. This gave the ruling dynasty a trusted representative in Thebes, where the Temple of Amun possessed enormous religious and economic importance. That was politically useful. A king governing from elsewhere could send a daughter to Thebes, where she became the visible head of a major sacred institution and helped connect the region to his dynasty. Under Kushite rule in the 25th dynasty, royal daughters from the Kushite family held the position. The Metropolitan Museum notes that these gods' wives became something close to the pharaoh's representative in the Theban region. How was the office transferred? By the first millennium BCE, succession often worked through formal adoption. The current office holder adopted a royal daughter as her successor. The younger woman could receive titles identifying her as the future holder, serve alongside the older women, and eventually inherit the institution. This was not a secret family arrangement. Royal inscriptions could publicly record the transfer. The best-known example is the adoption stela of Nitocris, which records the installation of Nitocris, daughter of Psamtik I, within the Theban institution. This method offered an important political advantage. A new dynasty did not always need to remove the existing god's wife violently. Its princess could be adopted into the institution, creating an orderly transfer of authority and presenting political change as legitimate continuity. Several office holders and their adoptive successors could therefore coexist, with senior and junior women holding related titles at the same time. Did they have to remain unmarried? This point requires caution. You may hear that every god's wife of Amun took an absolute lifelong vow of celibacy. The surviving evidence is more complicated. Earlier holders of the title could certainly be married queens and mothers. Ahmose Nefertari and Hatshepsut, for example, belonged to the royal family structures of the New Kingdom. The later office holders of the first millennium BCE are not known to have husbands or biological children, and their succession was managed by adoption. Scholars, therefore, often describe the later institution as celibate. But we do not possess a simple surviving rule book saying that every holder across every period took the same formal vow. The safest statement is, earlier gods' wives could be married royal women. Later divine adoratresses appear to have remained unmarried and passed the office through adoption rather than biological descent. That historical distinction matters. Participating in temple ceremonies before Amun and other gods. They could present offerings. They could shake the sistrum, the sacred rattle strongly associated with female temple service. They could perform ritual music and gestures intended to honor, please, or pacify the deity. They appeared in processions and religious festivals associated with Amun. Think about the Opet festival. Every year, Amun's sacred image made its journey from Karnak to Luxor Temple. The god's wife of Amun was one of the most important women in Amun's cult, so she almost certainly had a place in the ritual life surrounding celebrations like this, even if the ancient texts don't always tell us exactly what she did. Was she the only woman serving Amun? No. This is another important distinction. The Temple of Amun included many women with musical and religious titles, such as Singer of Amun. They formed part of the temple's female personnel and could perform music during ritual. The god's wife stood at a much higher institutional level. She was not simply one singer among many. In her later form, she was the head of a great Theban establishment. The office also employed male officials, stewards, estate managers, scribes, treasury personnel, and other administrators. The surviving tombs and titles of these officials show that the god's wife commanded an entire bureaucracy, not just a ceremonial group of musicians. So just how powerful did the god's wife of Amun become? By the third intermediate and late periods, incredibly powerful. What had once been a religious office had grown into one of the most influential institutions in southern Egypt. It controlled vast temple lands, enormous wealth, its own staff, and even its own administration. Some of these women became so prestigious that they commissioned chapels, statues, inscriptions, and magnificent tombs. They were even shown performing rituals that were normally associated with kings, and a few were honored with royal cartouches around their names. But that doesn't mean they became female pharaohs. They never replaced the reigning king as ruler of all Egypt. Their power was centered in Thebes, where they combined religious authority, economic strength, and real political influence. In fact, the office became so important that controlling who inherited it became one of the smartest ways for a new dynasty to secure its hold over southern Egypt. Instead of relying on military force every time power changed hands, they could often strengthen their position simply by ensuring that the next god's wife was loyal to them. The most famous god's wives of Amun. Amos Nefertari, one of the earliest and most influential god's wives, who helped establish the office's prestige. Hatshepsut held the title before becoming one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs. Neferure, Hatshepsut's daughter, who carried the title while still very young. Shepenwepet I, a Libyan princess who helped transform the office into a major political institution. Amanirdis I, a Kushite princess who strengthened Nubian control over Thebes through the office. Shepenwepet II played a key role in the peaceful transfer of the office to the Saite dynasty. Nitocris I, daughter of Psamtik I, whose adoption is recorded on the famous adoption stela. Akhnesneferibra, one of the last great god's wives before the Persian conquest, ended the office. Was there a physical relationship with the god? There is no evidence that the office involved a physical sexual ritual with a priest impersonating Amun. The language of divine marriage and fertility belonged to temple symbolism and royal theology. Scenes showing Amun approaching a queen in divine birth narratives concern the supernatural conception and legitimacy of a king. They are religious representations, not records of a human priest secretly taking the god's place. The office should not be sensationalized into a sexual cult without evidence. Its surviving monuments point instead to ritual performance, divine service, political legitimacy, property, administration, and sacred authority. Amun did not disappear immediately. His cult continued through later Egyptian history and into the Ptolemaic and Roman periods. Outside Egypt, he was also connected with the Greek god Zeus and worshipped in forms such as Zeus Amun. But Egypt's religious landscape changed profoundly during late antiquity. As Christianity expanded and traditional temple institutions declined or were closed, the public cult of Amun eventually ended. His temples remained, but no living priesthood continued the ancient daily service in the form practiced during pharaonic times. Does anyone still become the wife of Amun today? No. There is no continuous modern office of God's wife of Amun. Modern Egyptian society does not practice the ancient temple cult of Amun, and the title does not survive as a contemporary religious position. Today, the god's wives are studied through inscriptions, statues, chapels, administrative titles, adoption records, and archaeological remains. They belong to Egypt's ancient religious and political history, not to the religious practice of present-day Egyptians.
Don't forget to subscribe to us, friends. Art history and knowing it will make you a charismatic person.